how long have you watched woke culture infiltrate? I'm assuming it starts at the university level and permeates, but like, when did you first start to really see it and see it as a problem?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say like you, I noticed, I've seen woke infiltrate a lot of institutions, and our argument is pretty straightforward. You weren't given this power so that you could weaponize the legal profession against the Constitution.
Hey guys, if you've been paying attention to Canadian politics recently, you may have started to see some things where our courts are becoming more and more political every day. And, one of the things I used to really love about Canada was that, unlike the United States, the court system here was far more biased. It was just about, keeping things between the lines. Maybe there were some examples of, some political agendas being, used or pushed through the courts. But for the most part, I felt like our judicial system in Canada, historically has been fair and true and just looking for what's right. I think for a lot of us who've been paying attention, that may be changing in our eyes. And today we're going to have a conversation with a lawyer from Calgary named Glenn Blackett, who is right now in the middle of a very interesting lawsuit that we're going to talk about. It's an interesting time in Canada from a number of perspectives, and our legal system is not immune to that. That said, new episode of Army of Great Men. Let's go. Glenn, thanks for joining me. How are you, man?
I'm great. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting how this episode all came to be. I was talking about some of the things that are happening in Canada from a legal perspective, whether it be the ostrich farm or the judge in Saskatchewan who just said, you can't wear poppies in court because it's somehow political, whatever. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of different things happening in Canada right now. And then your wife actually reached out to me on Instagram and said, "Hey, you should talk to my husband. He's working on some pretty interesting things right now that I think you and your listeners would find quite interesting and appealing." So, Glenn, without me spilling the tea on all this stuff, why did your wife think you and I should have a conversation, and maybe give a little bit about your background, and then let's talk about this lawsuit that you're currently heading. It's a super interesting one. I've been reading all about it.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a lawyer. I work in the area of kind of constitutional law. I'm paid by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. And I've been doing that for a couple of years. What brought me to you was I was listening to your video and you were talking about, basically how politics and law just don't mix. And you saw this trend and that worried you. And that's 100% in my bailiwick, and my greatest concern professionally is the infiltration of politics, and in particular a brand of politics that's diametrically opposed to our Constitution into our legal system. And part of that is my lawsuit against the Law Society of Alberta, which is the regulator of lawyers in Alberta. And then part of that's just, other writing and activities that I'm involved in. But
and maybe, maybe me and a bunch of other people were just naive to the fact that politics couldn't kind of infiltrate and influence the law, right? Like, we see it with our teachers, we see it with this, we see it with woke culture, seems to be everywhere. Over the last month or two, I've really been kind of caught off guard with how that culture has infiltrated your world. I've only noticed it recently. How long have you noticed it? Like, how long have you watched woke culture infiltrate? I'm assuming it starts at the university level and permeates, but like, when did you first start to really see it and see it as a problem?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say like you, I noticed, I've seen woke infiltrate a lot of institutions,
Mhm.
And it's rarely an institution that it infiltrates and doesn't make much worse. Universities, especially, centers where we get together and with humility and scientific rigor, try to paw our way towards objective truth. Wokeness completely dismantles that entire concept, and the university becomes a safe place to indoctrinate people into all sorts of wicked lies, I think. So, I've seen it infiltrate a lot of organizations. It concerns me. It concerns me, I think, because when I was a younger guy, I took university at the University of Calgary, did a political science degree, and I did it under a number of professors. They were called the Calgary School. There was Ted Morton, Tom Flanagan, Barry Cooper, a bunch of different, conservative, right wing, extreme right wing, we'd call them now, academics. But they basically taught me what Western civics is, the basic fundamentals of this constitutional system we have. So I've watched with concern as I see institution after institution fall. Each institution it infiltrates, it both destroys, but destroys in a unique way. It just as thoroughly destroys them. But my concern with the infiltration of wokeness into the legal institution that is our justice system is that, unlike any other institution, that's one where we're just pouring poison right in the town's drinking water. It will just cause an absolutely systemic collapse of other institutions because, universities lease land, hire staff, have contracts, negotiate bargains, et cetera and so forth. The law has fingers everywhere. So once the law shrivels and dies, then every other institution, you can pretty much write them off.
One of the threats that I think that this causes is that it's so hard to undo, right? Because so much of the law is about precedent. And as these new precedents are being set, then it gives freedom and license to, enforce based on this ruling or that ruling or whatever. I think that's one of the challenges that most right wingers have is, if you're aware enough of what's happening in all these different areas, you can undo right wing policies in no time. Right wing policies are easy to undo. Left wing policies are not. They're sticky. And it just occurred to me while you were talking there that when you're setting new precedents with the law, they become incredibly sticky. And I could see how that could affect almost every area of our country and every area of society. It's actually, as you said it, I went from being curious to actually quite scared of all of this.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on there. One is conservatives or right wingers tend to be sort of more, let's not rock the boat. Let's keep things the way they are. Let's find compromise. Let's, in other words, unlike leftists, conservatives are really scared to use their power. So when conservatives are in power, they're tiptoeing and walking on eggshells and trying not to upset anyone. Whereas when leftists are in power, I mean, you look at the Trudeau government or look at the Carney government, they'll just tear the roof off the house. They don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
So part of it is that it's just our sort of tendency to try to, I don't know, find center, which I think is kind, but ultimately misled. And then in law, to your point, like an activist judge who doesn't like a precedent will find some reason to ignore it or warp it. A conservative judge who doesn't like a precedent is going to feel duty bound to implement it because that's what a conservative judge thinks the judicial system should do. They should follow old precedent.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And you can certainly fix it, but sometimes it can be, there was a famous case called Dred v. Scott in the United States. And that was a case where the U.S. Supreme Court, again, trying to find sort of a happy middle ground. I don't remember the details, but something along the lines of, if you're an escaped slave, you never stop being a slave owner's property, so they can come into the free states and they can come reclaim the slave. And that was considered a pretty pernicious case, and it took a long time to overturn, and eventually it was overturned. But there's a lot of damage that happens until it gets overturned. And, another case we could think of recently would be the U.S. Supreme Court's Dodd decision where they overruled Roe v. Wade. What was Dodd was probably 2024, I think, 2023, and Roe v. Wade was like 1973. So you got 50 years of this, I think, judicial invention working its evil in the country until it gets overturned. But it took a lot of courage, I think, for that court to overturn that. So I think you're right. It's harder to undo these things than it is to implement them.
Well, and it's interesting the way you talk about how, like woke activist judges, they have no problem using the law for their agenda. Whereas on the other side, it does seem that there still is the loyalty to the law itself and following it, whether you like it or not. It's the law. That's what you signed up for when you became a lawyer, is to respect the law above everything else. In the United States, as you're talking about that, there are pros and cons to our system versus theirs. And one of the things that, a big difference is the way that their judges are elected down there. Like their judges are inherently political because they're elected based on their ideologies and this and that. But like in Canada, so sorry, I should finish that thought. So in the US, like if a judge makes a ruling or something like that, as long as they're not at the Supreme Court, but any lower level, everybody knows who did it. In Canada, I don't feel like that's the case. Like I've looked at some of the rulings that have come down in Canada, and you can't even find the judges' names. Like, why is that? Is that meant to be secretive? Is that like, why can't you even find the judge who kicked the lawyer out in Saskatchewan about the poppy? Like, how do you find it?
Well, I mean, you should be able to find their names on the judgments, but I think that you're right. I'd say that Canadians are, we're a trusting bunch, right? So we have this institution called the justice system, and we have it in our head, and that this is a wonderful, credible institution, and I think for the most part it is. But in the U.S., there's a lot more acknowledgement of the fact that judges exercise power, and I don't know that it's just a function of elected judges. I think a number of judges are appointed still. I don't know what judges are elected. I know a lot of them are. I think it's really weird when you drive through the U.S. and you see these election campaigns.
I think it depends on which level you're at. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe in what state you're in. I don't know, whatever. But, but beyond that, I think there's also just, maybe it was Roe v. Wade that woke people up or something. But for a long time, Americans have understood that, the personality you put on the bench is going to change the case. You're going to get a different ruling if you get a different person on there. Just like it or not, the law is not perfect. The judge is going to affect things. And so I think they've recognized that for a long time. In Canada or in the US, they have a thing called the Federalist Society. And part of its mandate is to basically work to make sure that they identify conservative judges and that they work to promote their appointment by, governments. And I think that they're a big part of the reason that Roe v. Wade was overturned, and a big part of the reason that we have in the U.S. a conservative majority Supreme Court, where conservative means something in that context, not just, conservative like we have in Canada.
Right.
So, I think Canadians have got to wake up and understand the same thing, because we've got to start. I mean, when judges get appointed in Canada, I mean, there's a bunch of people that are involved in it, but there's no press release of, or there's no, the public isn't really involved in the conversation until it's happened. And then you have these judges on the bench, whoever they are. And why do they get picked? I mean, it's a black box. You don't really know why they get picked.
Yeah.
So we've got to get better at picking judges.
Yeah. Well, you got to get better at putting the people in charge who pick them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's too. Yeah, that too.
So let's talk about this lawsuit. I mean, I've been reading a little bit about it. It's super interesting. Give us the story. First of all, how did you find this case? Or how did it find you? How long have you been working on it? And
Sure.
Where are you at with it all?
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to about 1960 when my client in this case, a guy named Roger Song, he was born in China in the 60s sometime during the Cultural Revolution. And so he lived through the Cultural Revolution and maybe the Great Leap Forward and certainly Tiananmen Square. He was a hardcore communist. He taught at Beijing University, teaching international law. And so he came to Canada, eventually got his license to practice in Canada, I think 2014 or something like that. Loves Canada, doesn't see it as a system of systemic discrimination or something like that, because he came here a foreigner and has now found himself in a very privileged position, and he's doing quite well. So he's a big fan of Canada. He kind of basically back in 2019, the Law Society of Alberta. So this is there's a law that says there shall be a thing called the Law Society, and the Law Society shall govern lawyers. So the Law Society gets to basically decide who gets to be a lawyer and who doesn't get to be a lawyer anymore. And what does a lawyer got to do while they're practicing? So this Law Society of Alberta in 2019 really changed course a lot. And it suddenly mandated that every lawyer that wants to continue to practice in Alberta has to take this thing called the PATH. And it was an Indigenous, it was called a cultural competence education seminar. And so, and he was shocked because when he took the PATH, he saw that it was full of a bunch of history and politics and economics and stuff. And he knew there was something wrong. And in particular, what he knew was, just like in China, he's now taking what appears to him to be ideological training in order to keep his license to practice.
Right.
And he just thought there's something deeply, deeply wrong about this. So he basically organized a meeting of the Law Society, an extraordinary meeting of the Law Society. All the members, 10,000 could have come, only 4,000 came. That's still a lot of people in a meeting. He called a special meeting so that we could vote on getting rid of this rule that allowed them to mandate this training. And he needed to get a petition signed by a bunch of lawyers. I went to lunch to sign it with him. And that's how I met him. And that effort failed. So basically there was a meeting of 4,000 lawyers, 3,000 of them voted against the motion to get rid of this mandatory training. And about 800, which is actually a pretty big number given our limited means to rally the troops, 800 people supported the motion. So the motion was defeated. The mandatory training stays in the book. So then the question became, okay, what's next? The next thing we did was we organized a letter to government, to Daniel Smith, to the Minister of Justice, and to basically every member of cabinet. And we said, we got a serious problem here. We've got this political infiltration of the law. This is going to completely distort our legal system. You need to get it out. Do something now. We got a tepid letter back of thanks. Nothing much moved there. Although recently there has been a bit of movement there. We can talk about that. But then next step was, okay, fine, let's take this to court. So Roger sued the Law Society. I'm his lawyer acting on that file now. Sued them in 2013, argued the case in 2014. And then earlier this year, we got a decision on the case where the court basically said, I don't want to look at the evidence that you want me to look at. I don't want to think about, or rather, I don't think I should be thinking about even the issue of politics. And therefore, there's nothing to see here because I refuse to see anything here, basically. So we lost. And we're appealing that. So we'll go to the Court of Appeal. But let me just sort of explain what the claim is. The claim is basically that the Law Society of Alberta has a bunch of powers over lawyers. And the law is such that it says that if you have that power, if you have power from the government to do something, you can only use that power for the right reasons. So if I'm a police officer and I have the power to arrest someone, I can't arrest some hot girl because I think she's cute, right? If I'm a bank, I can't use my statutory powers to screw up somebody's credit rating because I don't like them or something like that. So anyway, that's pretty straightforward. If you have statutory power from the government, then you have to use it for the right reasons. Our basic argument is, okay, the Law Society, you've got all this power over lawyers. You've got to be using it for the right reasons. What reasons are you using it for? You're using it, A, to politicize the bar, which means make all of the lawyers, instead of loyal to the law, instead of saying, okay, client, here's the law, here's your rights under the law, let me help you access those rights. Instead of that, the lawyer has an attitude about the law. I like the law or I don't like the law. Okay. And so I'm going to, as a lawyer now, I have power, just like a judge. A judge could look at a case they don't like and it doesn't work for them. They're going to find a way around it. A lawyer can find a way around laws that they don't like. They can find ways basically to screw up laws that they don't like or flip them right on their heads. So one of the problems we have is that they're using the power over lawyers to basically make them political agents. So that's a serious problem. We're not political agents. We're supposed to help you access your rights under the law. We're not supposed to use the opportunity to go monkey with the law and change it. That's a problem. And then the next problem is that would be far less objectionable if your politics were something consistent with our general Canadian politics, but the specific politics that we're supposed to pursue is wokeness. And wokeness is literally like definitionally it is the opposite of the principles of our Constitution. So our argument is pretty straightforward. You weren't given this power so that you could weaponize the legal profession against the Constitution. Pretty obvious.
So when you say that, like it sounds, as you say, it sounds terribly obvious. How is there even a debate on this? Like if you take the woke, the feelings and the agenda out of it, if somebody is only looking at this based on the Constitution and the letter of the law, is this not the easiest case in the world?
Well, I'll tell you a little anecdote about that. It's the craziest file I've ever had. Okay, I've sued construction companies and I defend people who get sued for slip and falls, that kind of stuff, just normal stuff. So suddenly I find myself suing my law society, saying my law society is trying to weaponize the legal profession against the Constitution. Like, that's an outrageous claim. I'm writing my brief on this thing and I'm, 150 pages into the brief and I just keep shaking my head thinking there's no defense to this stuff. Like, it's once you actually look at the Law Society's materials and you kind of connect the dots, it's just absolutely damning. There is no excuse for it. And I said to everyone who would listen, this is crazy. This is indefensible. And then I said to them, and so there is going to be no attempt to defend it. There's going to be nothing but attempts to get around it. Let's basically, and that's what happened. So the Law Society basically said in their defense, okay, so let me just back up for a sec. I don't want to be too technical, but basically in the kind of lawsuit I'm in, usually what happens is the Law Society produces a thing called basically the record. Okay. A bunch of documents that the court gets to look at. Okay. And generally speaking, in a normal kind of procedure like I'm in, that's the only evidence you're going to look at. Okay. There's a bunch of exceptions that apply. And certainly in my situations, a bunch of exceptions should apply. One of the exceptions that applies is if they don't put the stuff in the record, if they don't put everything in the record. Okay. And so what we found was, if you look at the record that the Law Society put before the court, all this politics is absent. You can't see all this political stuff in there. Instead, it just talks about, not discriminating and not harassing and cultural competence. And cultural competence in the sense of there's kind of two different meanings to that term. One is knowing and understanding a person from a different culture, which, don't kid yourself, cultural competence does not provide you that power. Okay. You're no more culturally competent after you take cultural competence training, if that's what it means. And the other thing it means is pursuing this radical transformative agenda to basically destroy the Constitution. Well, when you look through the record the Law Society provided, you can't find any of this political stuff in there. You can find very little of it. So one of the things the Law Society said was, okay, well, you're trying to put all this political stuff in front of the court. It's not on our record, and you're not allowed to put in new stuff. So court, don't look at this evidence. Okay, you're not allowed to look at it. And the court said, yeah, I'm not allowed to look at it. So, okay, so not going to look at the evidence. And, it would be, on the one hand, there's a legal argument there that has to be made, and I made the legal argument. On the other hand, it's a slam dunk. Okay, it's a slam dunk. The court should have looked at this evidence, and that's why we've appealed, because we think that she clearly got to the wrong result. So that's one problem. The court said at the invitation of the Law Society, the court decided to close its eyes. That's a problem. And that's one way to not look at the problem that I'm seeing, that I'm saying this is so damning. Well, if you don't read the materials, it's not so damning anymore. So that's one problem. And then the other problem was, and this was kind of interesting, and I'm going to try not to get too hyper technical again either, but let's put it this way. The court has its role and the legislature has its role. Okay. And the legislature's role is they make up policy and they think about, what's best and, how should we attack these problems and stuff like that. And those kind of policy making function. Okay. And then they spit out law, and then the court's job is just to implement the law. They're not policy makers. They don't get involved in that kind of legislative side. So there's this kind of rule that the judge, it's called, I think in the US it's called the political questions doctrine. Basically, if something's kind of in that political legislative realm, the court says it's not really my business. So no, I'm not going to decide that issue. So again, this is an argument that the Law Society raised to say, look, their allegation is that we're being all political. Well, political doctrine thing says that you're not allowed to really think about this stuff because it's political, which is yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad you.
That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Well, I mean, the rule makes sense.
I know, except for the fact that the rule is the part that they're breaking, and you're trying to call them on breaking, and they're saying we can't talk about it.
Right.
Like it's the circle.
Right. It's almost like, I mean, the thesis here is that in a certain way, the Law Society is stealing power from the legislature. Okay, because the legislature changes the law,
right,
and they give it to the courts and judges and lawyers, and they all follow the law, right? Our premise is, well, if we all decide that we're going to be political agents and we're going to warp and change the law, aren't we stealing democratic power from the legislature? Well, the upshot of the decision here is not only is the Law Society, I mean, not that the court said this, but to the extent that the Law Society is stealing democratic power from the legislature, along with it, they get the immunity from judicial review, which is incredible. But anyway, so the court basically decided I'm not going to look at the evidence, and then basically decided I'm just going to completely close my mind to the whole realm of politics, which is not, even in the political, even if there's a political issue and the court is not allowed to make the political decision, the court is still absolutely required to look at what decision was made, understand what facts went into the decision, understand what outputs came out, make sure that the decision is consistent. Yeah, there's lots that goes on, but the court basically just said, oh, it's just a black hole. I'm not going to look at it all. So
it's just so hilarious that black hole that they're talking about is the root source, the root cause of your concern, yet they won't talk about it because that part is not something they can talk about.
Right. Yeah, like I mean, my feeling as I put together the application, the affidavits and all that kind of stuff, was that it is such a profound and important problem that once I get it in front of the court, they're not going to dare to, technically procedure their way around the problem. They're going to have to address the problem.
Right.
And I was wrong.
Are there other lawsuits like this in other provinces? Or are you the only one of its kind?
Yeah, I mean, almost the only one of its kind. I think that there's another lawsuit in BC, but they've taken a very, very narrow tact in BC. So what they've done in BC is, and I couldn't even say that it's a lawsuit at this point. I don't really know. But basically, the complaint of the sort of freedom-minded lawyers in BC is that, okay, you made us, or I don't know if it was in the mandatory training they took or where, but somewhere there's basically a piece of misinformation. Okay, and the piece of misinformation was, I think it was actually about the Kamloops Indian Residential School. That somewhere on some of their materials they said that there's 215 dead kids that were found there, right? And I don't know if your listeners know, but that's not quite what was found. What was found was radio anomalies, which could be sewage tiles and probably are septic tiles, could be previous excavations, could be rocks, could be nothing, or it could be the bodies of buried, murdered children, but nobody's bothered to find them yet.
Right.
Anyway,
regardless, it's never been proven either way.
No, and I mean, to me, okay, there was a genocide in Rwanda. I saw a lot of dead bodies. There were genocides in the forests in Poland, and after the after the Second World War, there was excavators digging up mass graves. The first thing you do when you find out that there's a mass grave is you excavate it, you investigate it, and you try to find, prosecute, jail, and maybe execute the people who did it. The fact that nobody has lifted a teaspoon to remove a piece of dirt in a so-called 215-person mass grave tells you, in my opinion, everyone knows it's not a mass grave. But
and it's not to say that residential schools weren't terrible and a bunch of bad things didn't happen, but it's also like, if they're making this claim, it shouldn't be that hard to, with today's technology and everything, it shouldn't be that hard to prove it.
The lawsuit or whatever it is in BC, the complaint is basically, okay, there's one little piece of misinformation, that's a problem. And my point is, a little piece of misinformation is a pimple on a dinosaur. We need to attack the beast here. We need to attack wokeness. Because if they decide, okay, well, we're not allowed to have this piece of misinformation, so we remove it, even though it's a vital piece of information that they don't want to remove.
Yeah.
And they don't want to litigate that issue. I don't know that much changes if you correct that as well.
What is your relationship with your fellow lawyers? Like, is this a story that a bunch of lawyers know about? Like, is what you're doing, is it being watched and scrutinized by lawyers throughout the province, or is it kind of, pretty quiet?
Yeah, pretty quiet, really. When we did the meeting and we tried to get a bunch of people together to get rid of the rule, things got kind of exciting for a while. So there was a bit of publicity. There was actually a letter that had been circulated by and signed by, I don't know, 500 or 600 Alberta lawyers, and it was actually fairly even keeled. But there was some little bit of attacks on us, but more kind of outside of those channels, we would see a lot of, attacks, especially on Roger, but my client who was pushing the motion as, racist and all the usual stuff, but not a ton. But in terms, like, for this lawsuit, I've done everything I can to get people's attention, but I would say by and large, most lawyers have no clue the lawsuit's going on. To the extent that they know the lawsuit's going on, their only thought is going to be, oh, what's the big deal? So we had to take mandatory training. It wasn't that bad, and it was kind of interesting. It was stuff that I didn't know, but they don't know what they're talking about. Like, it's
right.
not,
and it's the, it's leading them down that garden path, right? It starts with this, and then next thing you know, it's this, which is how so many of the freedoms that we've lost in this country started with, oh, it's just this. It'll be okay. It's just this. Then you wake up one day and it's like, holy what just happened? So with that in mind, if this doesn't stop, and if the woke, I don't know, indoctrination doesn't change, and you don't see changes in the culture with the law back to the way it was, 20 or 30 years ago, what do you think our country looks like from a standpoint of law and order? Like, how bad could this get in your
anarcho-tyranny? Right.
Talk about that.
Which
what
is
do you mean by that?
It's just a word I learned the other day, but I was like, wow, that is on point. Anarcho meaning no rules, tyranny meaning, tyrannical rule. Right. So, for the, and I think we kind of see it, right? Like, I don't want to get too, well, let's compare the treatment of January 6 rioters versus rioters during Black Lives Matter protests. So the Black Lives Matter protest caused, I don't know, several billions of dollars in damages. It lasted a number of months. It killed something like 50 people. It killed, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 officers, blah, 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 blah. Highly destructive. Virtually no prosecutions came out of it that I'm aware of, or that have been publicized. We know that, anyway. Then you look at January 6th. I've never seen, including the convoy in Canada, I've never seen a government more vigorously prosecute something. Like, there was people in, they had I saw something the other day that said something like the FBI had 20% of their workforce working on January 6th prosecutions. They left no stone unturned. They had people in solitary confinement for months or years without charge. I mean, just crazy stuff. But you see this complete dichotomy between, one group and another group. And you got to say to yourself, well, how could this be in a law and order society? Well, it's because the law can be applied in a biased manner to control and oppress one group and to, help another group, basically. And so you end up with a situation where you have, lawlessness everywhere, but for the sort of, I would say law abiding, conservative, kind of Christian person, you're going to have tyrannical oppression. So I think that, at the end of the day, that's kind of where it ends up. But the intermediate step is the dismantling of everything that we know and love about Canada.
Well, and like when you say those words, like it sounds like, you're talking about, like some like Hunger Games level,
Yeah.
A world we don't even recognize. But when you actually start to look at the way our legal system now works in Canada, like we're not that far off from what you're talking about. Like the whole, from the criminal side, our catch and release program, like I've got more than a few friends that are cops who they don't even know why they go to work anymore. Like they catch these guys and it's like they're out the next day. I played golf with a guy last year who got stabbed 7 times at a Tim Hortons drive-thru. It was the craziest story. So he's he had this routine where he'd go and go buy his coffee for the next morning because he works in the construction world. So he'd go to Tim Hortons, buy his coffee, and then just sit and organize himself for the next day, send his emails, wait in his car, and then drive home. And he'd do it at like midnight. So this guy knocks on his door and goes, "Hey, you want to buy some drugs?" And he's like, "No, I'm cool. Thanks. I'm good." And then like 3 minutes later, the guy comes back and he's like, "Hey, are you sure?" And like the guy sort of either had his door open or like it wasn't locked. And the next thing you know, the guy has his door open and he's stabbing him in the neck and the shoulder, all over the place. He missed, like the guy lived, obviously. I played golf with him. And and the reason we noticed, I saw these like marks on his arms. What the hell are those? He goes, "Oh, I got stabbed." And so like the day I played, I think it was like in August of this year, and it happened 12 months prior. And he goes, "Yeah, and the craziest thing is I just found out that they aren't even going to charge the guy with anything." They're just
what?
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Because they said there's no point. He'll be out in no time anyway. So they did nothing. And I heard this, like, I'm like, if I didn't hear it from the guy who it happened to, I wouldn't have believed the story. But I'm like, "Are you serious?" And he's like, "Yeah, I just got the call yesterday. They said, yeah, we're not even going to do it." Or like, you see, some of these rulings, particularly out in Ontario, like the mayor of Toronto is literally telling people, just leave your keys by the door so that they don't have to run in and hurt you, find them.
Right.
Like, what?
Yeah, don't fight back and just cooperate. And as opposed to, arm yourself and have us on speed dial because we'll be there with a tactical team to pounce on these guys.
Or the guy who got charged because he defended himself. He's going to face more punishment than the guy who broke into his house with a weapon. And so, like, I know
you're exactly right. That's exactly the look and feel of anarcho-tyranny.
Yeah. And, like when you describe it, if somebody isn't really awake to what's going on, they would look at that and go, "Oh my God, that'll never happen." But then you start to go through some of these examples and you go, "Well, wait a sec, isn't it already?" Like, how far off are we? And, the one thing, and I'm certainly not endorsing this, but like it does boggle my mind that we haven't seen more vigilante justice. Like I just feel like at some point people are going to start to go, "Okay, the law is not on my side. I have to start taking it into my own hands." And I fear that day because I feel like once that day comes, I don't know how you walk back from that. So I
think that's exactly right. Because we have a democratic political system that is intended to resolve political differences peacefully. We have laws that are intended to resolve, disputes between neighbors in a peaceful way.
Yeah.
if you don't have the same democratic rights and you don't have the same legal rights to protect yourself anymore, then, what, for what reason would you just allow yourself to be victimized by a system that gives you no power or rights, So I think I'm with you. And the other thing I would say too is it sounds kind of kooky. Like, again, it's a strange case for me. I'm making arguments that look, if once the legal profession goes woke, there's going to be all sorts of downstream consequences that are very serious. And I said to you a minute ago, like dismantling our Constitution, that sounds pretty, airy fairy. Like, what does that mean, dismantling the Constitution? Well, let's remember the Cowichan decision, right? So what was it, a month ago, the Cowichan decision in BC was released that basically said that these people who have held title to their property since the first, grant of title 150 years ago, the whole thing's been a fraud and you don't own it.
Yeah.
That's called the land back movement, right? And so and now I don't know that ruling very, very well, but it builds on years of what I think are pretty questionable judgments by courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada, which got us there, and so I think that we're only here because we've been shaped by the last 30 years of bad case law. And that 30 years of bad case law has been shaped by, I think, judges that don't have the right attitude towards the law. One of the things it sounds kind of kooky to say that, well, our Constitution will collapse, but here we are in real time watching one very important element of our Constitution collapse, which is the laws that govern private property and ownership and even just national sovereignty. So that's a big change. And the other thing I would add is, so you remember I said that we were required to take training in Alberta. This, the thing that got Roger upset, it was called the PATH. It was cultural competence training. Okay, one of the competencies that we learned was that in Alberta, we have a bunch of treaties, right? So we don't have the BC problems because they surrendered their land, right?
Yeah.
Written in ink, surrender. Well, wouldn't you know it? The Law Society taught us in this cultural competence training that when the Indigenous people surrendered the lands and signed these treaties, they thought they were agreements to share the land. Treaties are agreements. They're not documents of surrender. They're documents of sharing land, that's a complete perversion of what the word surrender means, right? Yeah. So before Albertans get all high on the hog thinking, well, we got it right because we've got treaties, well, wait until your woke legal profession gets those treaties.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrifying. I told a story on Instagram the other day. So I've got a cousin who she bought a property in Vernon a number of years ago, but she knew that it was owned by the reserve. So like she had a land lease and then she bought this house. So like it's a $2 million house if she owns the land, but it's like a $200,000 house because she does it right on the lake, like beautiful, right? But she knew that going in that like that's what she was buying. So she couldn't get a mortgage on it. She can't borrow against it. She knows that at any time, if new chief wants to say, no, I'm taking that. Like she can't but she knows that risk.
Right.
Quite another for someone who spent $2 million on that home and then the rules change and now they can't get a mortgage. They it is one way to lower property values, make housing more affordable.
Yeah, well, less affordable because no one can get a mortgage though. But yeah. They'll get
it's
cheaper.
Crazy. One of my favorite games to play is I've got lots of American friends and roughly, more than half my followers on Instagram are south of the border. And when I tell stories about how things work in Canada, like Americans think their country's messed up. It doesn't hold a candle to Canada. It doesn't hold a candle. Like when I tell people, oh yeah, this is the way this works. They're like, there's no, you're lying. There's no way. I can't be. Oh yeah, here. And I sent them the proof and they're just like, what? Yeah. It's crazy how in just 11 years, we went from being, what I think most Canadians thought. I mean, Americans always say, oh, yeah, we've got the best country in the world. Prior to 12 years ago, Canada was pretty damn good. And it's unrecognizable now. Like it really is from every perspective. What do you think about what's coming down the line with these new hate speech laws that are modeled after what the UK has. Have you done any digging or research on that?
Yeah, I've looked a bit at what used to be Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, which got shelved, and I think it's coming back. I looked at Bill C-9. I mean, it's been a while since I looked at 63, but it doesn't just prohibit certain things. It creates an entire administrative state to enforce those prohibitions, and it has a whole snitch system, and it's dark. And so it's like censorship on an industrial scale. And I could be wrong, but I understand that in the United Kingdom in the last, I can't remember, it is 2 years or something like that, there's been 10 or 12, or sorry,
it's
10 or
it's this year.
Okay.
It's 2025. There's already been 12,000 arrests. Yeah. And like if you're not paying attention, you might go, well, yeah, I'm okay with people being punished for hate speech. Like, that's okay. But then you got to go, well, who determines what's hate, right? Who draws the line? Who says, well, this is hate and this isn't, right? Like, that's a question that you then have to ask. There was a guy the other day, he got 2 years in prison in the UK simply for talking about concerns he had for the way their immigration system worked, right? He didn't say anything about a specific race, a specific religion, anything like that. All he said, and the judge ruled that what he said would certainly incite violence and hate against immigrants. And it was like, I watched the whole thing. It was benign at worst, like at worst. And then like I was laughing, I was showing my girlfriend my page and I went, well, I'd go to jail for this. And
yeah. Yeah. About 2 years ago, I told my wife, you should probably start mentally preparing yourself for me going to jail, because I could just sort of feel it's coming, and I didn't know why, but things are crawling at, not because I'm an illegal guy or doing bad things or anything but just I'm a conservative and I'm not going to keep my mouth closed,
Yeah.
So, and she thought it was maybe a little bit silly back then, but then when I saw Bill C-9, I thought, oh no, we're getting close now.
Than we think.
We're getting close. Yeah. And I think, I would say, I thought Trudeau was just the biggest loser creep ever. But when he was at a press conference once and he said, we have free speech in Canada, but we don't have the freedom to hate. And I kind of chortled and I said, yeah, we do. Like, what are you talking about? That's not true. The government is not allowed to prohibit the contents of my brain. That's 1984 Orwellianism, and this is so I don't, even though I understand, it's not, hate's a bad thing, right? Okay. So if there's like a Nazi that says, I hate Jews, that's a bad thing. I wish that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But to criminalize that or to even prohibit it and punish it somehow it's not a slippery slope. It's a cliff. You're just jumping off a cliff into just totalitarianism. It's just,
right.
You can't do it safely.
And it's not that there's not a consequence for saying that, right? Like if you go online and you're a Nazi and you say, I hate Jews and I'm glad for the Holocaust from, whatever, I think it's totally fine. If your employer says, yeah, I don't want you working here anymore. I think it's totally fine. If you're a business owner and you say that, where everybody goes, yeah, I'm not shopping there anymore. I'm not giving that asshole my business. I'm not doing that. That's society just sorting it out. So it's not to say that there's not consequence for hate. But society gets to be the judge on that. Oh, I'm not going to do business with this person anymore. I don't want that person working for my company anymore. I don't want that person representing me. I'm not going to follow that person online. I'm not, like whatever. Society will sort that out based on society's views of right and wrong. It's not up to our politicians to say, no, I get to decide what's allowed to be said and not.
Yeah, I think it's a very wise observation. Yeah, and I think that Roger, my client, has taught me a lot, and he's been harping on about the preamble to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which says, and nobody pays any attention to it, whereas Canada is a country founded upon the principles which recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And he thinks supremacy of God means whatever he thinks it means, and everyone else seems to think it means absolutely nothing. I think, to your point, what it means to me now is that it is not the state's job, and the state is not the source of truth and morality. Society and people are the source of truth. Well, I mean, God, God is the source of truth and morality. And people, free people get to go find it themselves, right? And but the job of the state, as soon as the job of the state becomes the dictator of truth and the dictator of morality, again, that's totalitarianism. So,
That's right.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't know if you'll have an answer for this or not, but like I lay awake at night and I look at not just the things that we're talking about today, but all of it, right? And I've thought about this forever in Canada, United States, and the world and whatever. And I keep thinking, okay, what would it take to make it better, right? Like I'll lay awake at night and I think, okay, what would it take to unite us all, right? Like, I think about 9/11 and I think about if 9/11 happened today, there'd be just as many people cheering for the terrorists as mourning the victims, right? Whereas then, we weren't so divided at that time that you could come together and go, okay, yeah, hey, we got to put our differences aside for a minute. We're all on the same team here. It's time to unite, right? Like I still remember, and I wasn't a George Bush fan by any means, but I still remember when he gave the big State of the Union address, and all of Congress, Dems, Republicans, everybody stood up, united, standing ovation. Okay, we're Americans first. Like this is what we're going to do. I can't imagine a scenario that would unite humans. Like maybe like an actual alien invasion, like Mars attacks. Okay, I guess we better get
yeah.
I can't think of one that would unite people. And so, like, I give you that context. What do you see from the standpoint of the law? Do you see a path where this can go back to where it was, or do you think this is the new normal and this is it, and we're gonna have to tear it all down before it gets better?
Yeah. I mean, you're asking a question that a lot of people in the freedom community ask, which is am I black pilled yet? Have I given up? And I'm not black pilled. Can we get it back to the way it was? I would say probably not. I think probably not, because we've come too far. It's just, realistically, I look at COVID, and like COVID was about, in a way, it was this big, complicated globalism and passports and all this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, there was some very simple facts. One of the simple facts that we found out really early on was that the vaccines didn't stop the spread. Right? Vaccines they're not vaccines, and they're more of a therapeutic. They're supposed to help you if you're fat and 80 years old and on death's door. They're supposed to help you not die. That's basically what the vaccines did. But my point is, we learned early on that they didn't stop the spread, but that didn't stop mandates. That simple little fact couldn't pierce the public consciousness. And so I look at that same public and I say, when is it going to pierce the public consciousness that they've handed over their legal profession and their legal system to political zealots? Yeah. It'll be conversations about hate or reconciliation. People, we're not paying attention. So no. I think we're a long way away from, even as a society, grappling with what we need to grapple with.
Yeah. And I think, as you say that, like I love when people wake up, right? And everybody's got their tipping point, right? Like COVID was one for a lot of people. There've been moments where they went, "Oh shoot, hang on." And then once they see the lie, then they start to see that the agenda is the same for, all these different things. And my mom was like that, right? Like her dad was an NDP MLA. She, if you cut her, she would have bled orange. Like she was, she was as far left as you could get.
Yeah.
And then, but she had a biochem background and loved doing her own research on this, that, and everything. And then her eyes were actually open. My brother-in-law actually worked with RFK Jr. on the World Mercury Project in like 2012.
Oh, wow.
So she started to be kind of awake to some of the things that were going on, and was a huge RFK fan. And then when COVID hit, she started to really see it. And then I said, "Okay, Mom," I said, "so, you see the agenda and you see what happens, people who speak out about it." I said, "Have you ever considered, looking at climate change the same way?" And she goes, No, that's different, Adam. No, totally different. And And then, of course, so I left it alone and then just gradually nudged her a little bit.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story short, she died as a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party of Canada, much to the chagrin of all of her sisters and family. But my favorite conservatives are the ones who were there, had the courage to leave what they thought they knew, and went, oh, wait a sec, this is not quite right. What bothers me so much, though, is that more people haven't seen it, right? And I don't know if it's a stubbornness. I don't know if it's just a complete, unwillingness to accept that maybe they're wrong. Maybe it's a fear that, they would look dumb if they did that. Maybe it's a cultural fear that they'll get shunned and ostracized. I don't know what it is, but I can't figure out how everybody hasn't seen it by now. How can you not see it? Right? It's so easy to fact check their lies now. It's so easy. And yet they still refuse to do it. I mean, if in Canada, as bad as things are, I ask the question all the time online, what part of your life is better? Which part? Mm-hmm. Which part of the country is better? Mm-hmm. Which group of people, which religion, show me one section of this society that's better in any way. You can't. There's mm-hmm. not one. And then if election was held today, it would be another Liberal government.
Yeah. I mean, I think through COVID, we heard about mass formation psychosis, right? So that's one explanation for this stuff. The other day I was listening to a podcast about basically that humans have a tendency to sort of short circuit their reasoning in order to agree with their group.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's kind of it makes sense, right? If you're the one guy on the hunt and you decide to do something which screws up the hunt because you think you had a better idea, you're an idiot and you're going to be an outcast. So, social conformity is a very important thing for survival, and it's an important thing for society. So it's a good thing. You don't want to be Spock and blow up society. So, you need to have that kind of emotion. But I think that, to maybe answer your question, that, part of the problem is just part of the problem is people, they have the herd mentality. They want, if everyone else around them says this is a good thing, then they think, well, it's probably a good thing, which is it's a good heuristic, right? It's a good shortcut rule of thumb. If everyone thinks a certain thing's bad, it's probably bad. Okay. That's a good way to do your thinking if you don't have time to do any more thinking. And that's
yeah.
And that's the problem, is there's no more thinking after that, Yeah. And so I think that, and I think that, I actually think that, you hear that quote, what is it? Bad times make for good men, good men make for good times make for weak men make for bad times. So, and I think, we're somewhere on that spectrum, and where we're on it is, we had the greatest generation or whatever, fought World War I, fought World War II, basically built Canada for what it was before they decided to change the flag in 1960, whatever, and turn it into this multicultural paradise that's slowly falling apart. But I think what happened is our institutions were so good and so solid, including especially media, that we all got used to just downloading our thinking to the media. So, if, now you have people that are watching The View, and whatever The View's political opinions are, well, those are my political opinions because I can trust the media.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's a big part of it, is just,
Yeah. There's have you ever seen the show The Push?
No.
So from an ethical standpoint, I still can't believe they made this. They pulled it down.
I like it already.
There's place you can do it. So what it is, it's this guy, I can't remember his name, but he's made a few shows like this that are crazy controversial, and you'll get it in a second. So the purpose of this show is they take one person who's not an actor, and he doesn't know that everybody else is an actor. And what they do is they try to manipulate him or her through a bunch of different things to get to the point where they eventually will push a guy off a building and kill him.
Okay.
And they do this over the course of 4 hours.
Wow.
And the first test, because they've got to sort out who they can manipulate and who they can't, right? And as you're watching it, everybody does the same thing when you watch it. You watch it and you go, no, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
That's when I would have stopped. Or no, I wouldn't have done that. But the very first test they do is they're all in this waiting room. And this bell rings and everybody stands up. And then the bell rings again and everybody sits down. And the guy who's the mark, he doesn't know. She doesn't know. And they're looking around going, why the hell is everybody standing up? Oh, the bell rang. And then the next time the bell rings, the mark stands up. I got to conform. I got to fit in. Right.
Yeah.
And I won't tell you how it ends. It is like from I can't believe they made this show. I can't believe they did it. But, and this was done like, I think it was done about 10 years ago, long before we saw the manipulation of COVID. But, it's like that that line, the famous photo from World War II when Hitler's giving his big address and everybody's got their arm with the salute. And there's one old man, he's got his arm like this.
Right.
And the line is, if you like, everybody thinks they'd be that guy, right? Well, if you want to know, you're doing it now. Right. And the truth is most people would have their hands in the air. Right. That's just how it works. So
anyway. Have you ever heard of the Milgram experiment?
No.
It was a 1960s experiment where this guy, kind of a similar setup, he would it was after the Second World War. I think it was trying to understand why people follow evil orders, basically. And the setup was basically the mark, as you put it, was helping in a study. Not actually, they weren't the subject of the study, or so they were told. And their job was to sit at a panel and press buttons, and the buttons would deliver electrical shocks to people on the other side of a wall.
I haven't heard of this. Yeah.
Yeah. And basically, as long as the guy in the white coat that was running the thing told the person, the mark, you have to hit the button, the kill button, then hit the kill button, people would almost always hit the damn kill button. And so far as they know, kill this person on the other side of a screen that they couldn't see. So as long as a person in authority is telling you to do that, then you're likely to follow orders, right? So, but I think that what I think is, I love that concept of the the one guy with his hand up, because the lesson from the Second World War, the lesson from Nazi Germany is that in the right conditions, a society entirely will go crazy and will do heinous, evil things. So what you should be watching out for is not, heinous, evil things on the horizon, but rather being swept up in this social madness to do things that you're being told are for your safety, when in fact they're, obviously destructive to somebody.
Yeah. But, and it's why I think the answer to the question that I asked you, and again, I'm not endorsing this, but the question of what's going to make it better, it's going to be when people actually rise up and say, okay, I'm done. Like, I'm done. And call that civil war, call that whatever, but like,
even just speaking up. Like, I was so buoyed. I didn't go to a Remembrance Day ceremony this year.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to put my family in a position where I embarrassed them all, where I objected to what was being said. The last time I went to one, I quietly, after the ceremony, went up to the pastor and I said, isn't it kind of ironic that we're here talking about the people that are died to save this country, and you open with a land acknowledgement where, you're basically encouraging us into the view that we don't actually own this land that they died for. And then secondarily, the pastor in the ceremony was talking about how the Second World War was fought against hate. And I said, no, it wasn't. It was fought for freedom, including the freedom to hate. So they're just objectionable now because they've been politicized. And anyway, my point was, I was buoyed to see in Ontario, or maybe it was Ottawa, there was a Canadian man during they started the Remembrance Day ceremony the other day, and with a land acknowledgement, and he started shouting, no, stop it. Stop this garbage. We're here to honor our war dead.
Yeah.
And that's what we need. I mean, we don't necessarily need civil war just right away here. We need people to open up their mouths and get uncomfortable and say what you're thinking. Stop participating in this public lies.
Yeah. And that's what makes the hate speech law so scary, right? Like right now, you have the ability to do that. That could be gone very, very quickly. And in fact, like, it probably will be. Like, that bill is well well down the path. So anyway, Glenn, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed this. Good for you for having the stones to have this fight that you're having. This is David versus Goliath for sure. And like the way you describe it, it's almost like you're playing chess against someone who can just move their pieces wherever the hell they want to suit their own agenda.
Yeah,
right?
I gotta follow the
you're
rules.
Not going to win that game. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that there are still some people out there that have the courage to do it. And I mean, we might as well use our voices while we can, because that day could be gone soon. So anyway, Glenn, I know you're a busy guy. Thanks for taking the time. And thanks, man. This is great.
Thank you very much. See you.
Yeah. Thank you.